They ask for nothing more. They cannot accept nothing less and nothing else. The future of freedom, justice, and peace can begin here and now. It is within your power to give the clearest statement possible on what the law is, what it requires, and what it means in practice for all members of the United Nations. We trust in your wisdom, your fairness, and your dedication to justice and the rule of law, and I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Mansour. This concludes the oral statement of the State of Palestine. Your statement brings to an end this morning's session. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Here, South Africa, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Bangladesh, and Belgium. The sitting is adjourned.
Standard for the existence of apartheid. Apartheid exists in the occupied Palestinian territory. 20 participant states expressly hold the same position, including victims of apartheid, South Africa and Namibia. As all states parties to the CERD, Israel is under obligation to particularly condemn racial segregation and apartheid. Undoubtedly, apartheid falls within the scope of discriminatory measures referred to in the UNGA resolution requesting this advisory opinion. This court as early as 1971 in its Namibia opinion, also confirmed that apartheid amounts to a flagrant violation of the purposes and principles of the Charter. Further, the ILC has listed the prohibition of apartheid as a peremptory norm, permitting no derogation. Applying the definition of apartheid, which reflects customary law, in both the 1973 Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid and the 1998 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, Israel's policies and practices in the OPT meet the evidentiary standards for the existence of apartheid. First, the existence of two or more different racial groups is present. International law determines racial groups by the subjective perception of the group that it has a separate identity. Judged by this standard, two distinct separate racial groups coexist in Palestine, namely the indigenous Palestinian population and Israeli Jews. Second, the establishment of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another undoubtedly exists. As evidenced in the State of Palestine's written statement, Israel has, in purpose and in effect, elaborated through laws, military courts, violence, discriminatory zoning and planning, and collective punishment, the system to subjugate Palestinians. They are confined in space and rights. They travel on segregated roads, a phenomena that even apartheid South Africa never knew. Third, the commission of inhumane acts is endemic. Israel subjects the Palestinians at unprecedented levels to inhumane acts as defined by these two conventions. Such inhumane acts include murder, forcible population transfer, massive arbitrary arrest, imprisonment, and torture. And while the occupation continues, they are becoming more egregious every year. Finally, the inhumane acts are committed with the purpose of maintaining the apartheid regime, and by it, maintaining permanently Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territory. As was shown by Mr. Reichler, the statements of Israel's highest government convincing Israel's determination to dislocate the Palestinian population, annex its territory, and maintain its system of colonial settlement, all attest to Israel's intention to maintain an apartheid-based occupation regime permanently. In July 2014, Israel's then Minister of Justice declared, and I quote, "What's so horrifying about understanding that the entire Palestinian population is the enemy? They are all enemy combatants, and their blood shall be on all their heads. They should go, as should the physical homes in which they raised the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there." End of quote. Tragically, this is just one of the many dehumanizing descriptions by Israeli officials of Palestinian children. Snakes. Snakes, Mr. President. For all the above reasons, the State of Palestine requests the court to declare that Israel's discriminatory practices against the Palestinian people are tantamount to apartheid, which this court defined in its 1971 advisory opinion on Namibia as distinctions, exclusions, restrictions, and limitations exclusively based on grounds of race, color or descent, or national or ethnic origin, which constitute a denial of fundamental human rights. This actually reflects the Palestinian reality. Mr. President, members of the court, 47 United Nations experts have declared that if the occupation is not brought to an end, and I quote, what would be left of the West Bank would be a Palestinian Bantustan, islands of disconnected land completely surrounded by Israel and with no territorial connection to the outside world, and would be the crystallization of an already unjust reality. Two peoples living in the same space, ruled by the same state, but with profoundly unequal rights. This is a vision of a 21st century apartheid. This is apartheid. The Palestinian population in Israel stands at 20%. Hence, Israel's discriminatory treatment of Palestinians must be viewed in its totality. As Palestine and other participants demonstrated in their written statements, the system of racial discrimination extends to all areas between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Furthermore, Palestine, Namibia, and South Africa, together with a myriad of public figures, legal scholars, NGOs, concur that such discriminatory treatment amounts to apartheid. Even some Israeli officials admitted it. Although it might not be clear to the naked eye, by Israeli law, Jewish citizens of any country who have never been to Israel can automatically gain Israeli citizenship. Yet, Palestinians, refugees who have spent their entire lives in forced exile and in refugee camps are barred forever from returning to their homelands. Unfortunately, time won't allow me to expose the full extent of Israel's discriminatory laws, but I would only highlight that Israel has an extensive set of laws discriminating against Palestinians in every aspect of life. This was not left unnoticed by CERD, which noted that the practice of segregation between Jewish and non-Jewish communities continues to be applied in Israel proper. A one-state reality of unequal rights, consolidating segregation and apartheid against Palestinians, is reflected in the inherently discriminatory character of the 2018 Basic Law, Israel, the nation-state of the Jewish people. Under this law, exercising the right to national self-determination in the State of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. Developing Jewish settlements became an Israeli national value, not only in the occupied West Bank and the Syrian Golan, but even in Israel. And I ask where? On which lands? The answer is on the lands where Palestinian citizens of Israel live, especially in the Galilee and the Naqab. An exclusive right of one group and complete denial of the rights of another. From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, if this is not apartheid, what is? Israel's measures, policies, and practices against the Palestinian people are no less pervasive in their reach or less pernicious in their consequences than the institutionalized racial discrimination and segregation that existed in South Africa. And just like in 1971, the international community relies on this court to play its own genuine role to bring about an end to this glaring injustice. An immediate end to this illegal situation will bestow on the Palestinian people the fundamental rights to which they are entitled by international law, yet, unfortunately, they have been so unjustly denied. Let me conclude, Mr. President, with a cry of desperation. representing the countless victims of the ongoing Israeli atrocities, as described by the Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti. In my despair, I remember, there is life after death, there is life after death. And I have no problem, but I ask, oh God, is there life before death? Mr. President, members of the court, I thank you for your kind attention. Mr. President, I respectfully request that you now call Professor Sands to the podium. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Nagum. I now invite Professor Philip Sands to address the court. You have the floor, Professor.
Mr. President, members of the court, it is an honor to address you this morning on the subject of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. The extended deprivation of this inalienable right and its permanent quest to exercise it fully. 53 states and 3 international organizations submitted written statements to the court. Not a single one, not even Israel, claimed that the Palestinian people was not entitled to self-determination under international law.
Mr. President, the written statements before you offer no discordant note to the 3 core propositions the state of Palestine advances in these proceedings. First, the Palestinians are a distinct people. Second, as such, they enjoy the very same rights as every other people, including that most foundational of rights, namely the right to self-determination, to decide for themselves how they will live and organize politically, socially, economically, in accordance with and subject to international law. As Professor Hirsch Lauterpacht put it in 1945, in the language of another age, freedom means, and I quote, the right of self-government through rulers chosen by and accountable to him. And equality demands an equal opportunity of self-government and cultural development. End of quote. Third, the Palestinian people's right to self-determination has real and practical consequences. It is not an empty slogan. That right includes, but is not limited to, the right to control their own land and natural resources, the right to be free from demographic manipulations by any third party, and the right to determine their own political status, economic development, their own futures. Mr. President, members of the court, there is no dispute as to the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. It has never been an issue, not since the time of the mandate. And this court made that clear 2 decades ago in its opinion in the War case, when it said loud and clear, the existence of a Palestinian people is no longer an issue. What is before this court now is the ability of the Palestinian people to exercise that right, and Israel's systematic and prolonged violation of that right. What does the right to self-determination mean in practice? How has Israel violated it? And what are the consequences of those violations? Mr. President, members of the Court, in its written statement, the State of Palestine explained that the right to self-determination comprises 4 specific components. First, the right to territorial integrity. Second, the right not to be subjected to demographic manipulations within that territory by a foreign power. Third, the right to exercise permanent sovereignty over its natural resources. And fourth, the right to be able to pursue its chosen economic, social and cultural development. The prolonged occupation, colonisation and purported annexation